This is a game I played back in 2012. My opponent was a computer program called Houdini, which was one of the strongest programs at the time, and I was playing it on full strength, which means it was looking at like 3 million positions per second. So I knew I was going to lose this game, but my goal was just to last as long as I could. And I made it to almost move 40 before I knew that the end was near. So I was pretty happy with the way it turned out, and it had a kind of an interesting ending. The computer found some brilliant moves to finish me off. I had the black pieces. The computer starts off with d4, so d5, some standard opening moves, c4, e6, knight c3, and here I played a move which I don't play anymore, g6. It's not very common. What I play now is e6, but g6 and then e3. So I'm fianchettoing my bishop over here and getting ready to castle. Alright, so we both castle. Knight b to d7. A more popular plan here for the few strong players that get to this position is to play a6 and then plan on playing b5. So challenge that pawn, which is a key pawn for white. But anyway, knight b d7, and here the computer takes my pawn. So I recapture with a pawn. You don't want to recapture with a knight, because then just e4, and white's got a strong pawn center, so you want to keep that pawn in the center. Central pawns are always good. So queen b3, attacking this pawn here on d5 with two pieces, knight and queen, so I just defend with e6. Knight b8 was a move. This move works sometimes, and I thought about it, because you want to redeploy your knight to c6, which is a better square. But the drawback is that it takes two moves, and that's, I think, why I rejected it. Yeah, you can see something like this, knight c6. I think it's okay. I think it's at least as good as what I played. There was also knight b6. The computer thinks this is playable, and if he tries to kick my knight away with a4, we go a5. I looked at this too, but I didn't like the weak squares. This b5 is a weak square because it can't be hit by one of my pawns anymore, and also this knight doesn't have any protection except for the queen, so the b6 square where this knight is a little weak, so that's why I didn't play either of those moves. But e6, bishop d2, developing the bishop, knight e4, and this is the best move. I was happy I found this move. It shows that I had progressed in my chess thinking, because I wasn't afraid of the knight being captured, because this just favors black. Even though it doubles my pawns, this isn't a big deal. He can move his knight, and he's got to move it backwards. So his knight is forced to an inferior square, and I don't really have to worry about these doubled pawns, because I can always play f5 at some point to defend. So that wouldn't be good for him to capture my knight. Instead, he just plays rook f to d1. And he's planning on recapturing the bishop with a rook, I think, which is going to help him out. He doesn't mind giving up this bishop for my knight here, because this is a strong knight in the center, and this bishop is sort of blocked by his own dark squared pawns. It's not a great bishop, so he doesn't mind if I take it, which I do, because after all, it is a bishop. And I wanted to put my queen to b6, but you can't do that as long as the knight's up here, because now he can take, and when I recapture, he can play knight g5, which was a move he didn't have when my queen was on d8. When my queen was on d8, he just had to retreat to that ugly e1 square. But here he's attacking this pawn, so you got to do something about that. You can take the queen and give him these doubled pawns, but this isn't so bad for white. Now he's got an active rook, and I can't really win this pawn very easily. And this pawn's still under attack, so what am I going to do about that? f5 fails to knight takes e6. I can defend with knight f6. But then his pieces start getting active. Bishop b4. If the rook goes here, he attacks with this bishop. So I'm going to end up having to put my rook to here. And he can come in here and do this kind of stuff. And he can take my knight out and then get the pawn. Stuff like this. I knew this wasn't great. That pawn was a weakness in that line. So I said, you know what? Let's grab the bishop. Bishop for knight is always good. And then we're going to put our queen to b6. Now here he played rook takes d2, which is very good. There was some strong players in the database that actually played knight takes d2. But rook takes d2 is better for him, I think, because his plan is he's going to double the rooks really quickly on this open c file. So he'll get a rook to c2 and a rook behind it on c1. So I think that was the better way to play. So now I can play my queen b6, challenging his queen on b3, which was looking at this pawn, and it's hard to ever move this bishop if the queen's going to capture that pawn. I mean, you could defend it with a rook or something, but I needed to develop my queen as well. So, and I also wanted to trade queens because, you know, it'll just make it easier to draw, and that's kind of my goal against the computer program, because I knew I wasn't going to win. So let's try to get the queens off the board. But he didn't want to have any of that, and he just moved his queen. And so here, develop my knight to f6. Now he goes knight to e5. He's stopping my bishop d7, which would attack the queen, since he'd have the knight and the queen hitting it. Can't go there yet, so I just defend that square with a rook, so I can go here with my bishop. And now he plays rook to c1. He's just getting ready to double the rooks on the open file. Bishop d7. So now I'm returning the favor. I'm offering my kind of bad light squared bishop, you know, blocked by my pawns, for his knight, which is very well placed. Thought maybe he would take it, but he didn't. Instead of taking it, he just moved his queen back to d1. He said, you know what, I like my knight here better than winning your bishop, and even at the cost of sort of wasting a move with my queen, I'm going to turn down your offer for a trade. So I was a little worried about this knight takes, rook takes, and then he doubles his rooks, and then maybe a piece coming to b5. But here I can just play rook c7, and there's not really any danger. If he goes knight to b5, we'll just take on c2. Rook takes, we'll just kick the knight. He doesn't really have anything too scary here. We're getting pieces off the board. So that wasn't anything to worry about. And that's probably why he didn't play it. He wanted to keep more pieces on the board. He moved his queen back. So now I just put a rook to the open file, which isn't the best. It seemed pretty natural to oppose the rooks, which will soon be doubled on this file. But these rooks will only be a threat if this knight here can find a good home. So it may have been better to preserve this light squared bishop at this point by going back here. Now if he doubles rooks, the point is the knight isn't going to be able to come to a4 because I'll capture it with my bishop. That's why it's useful to preserve this bishop, because in the game he got his knight to a4 and then he went to c5, which was pretty nice for him. So it might have been a little bit better not to let him take, even though he didn't take. He went rook d to c2. Now what happens if I move my bishop back right here? This doesn't work at this point, because now that he's got the rooks doubled, if I move my bishop back, he's got this. Attacking the queen and also a discovered attack on my rook. He'll win a rook, basically a rook for knight, which is a theme that occurred for several moves. I had to watch out for things like that because there was a lot of lines where this knight moves and puts my queen under attack. So I played rook to c7, getting ready to double my rooks. I want to trade off all the rooks. It'll help me secure a draw. So now he takes on d7, and this was perfect timing, because now I'm not going to be able to double my rooks. I have to take with a rook. If I take with a knight here, again, knight takes d5, attack on the queen, also an attack on the rook. Got to save my queen, and then I'm going to lose a rook. That's why he took right there, and I had to take with this rook, so that if he tries this now, I'll have adequate protection on my rook once I recapture, so that doesn't work for white now. So he goes knight to a4, attacking my queen, and I went to d6, which is the only move. Anywhere else, we run into the same problems. If I try to go here, there's b4, and my queen's sort of running out of squares. If I take the pawn, well, guess what? Rook takes. There's nowhere I can go to protect my rook on c7. So you really got to go to d6 with the queen. Keep protection on that rook. Now he goes to c5, attacking my rook on d7. So I move it to e7. Again, rook d8 runs into this move. Again, attacking my queen. 2 rooks attacking the rook. So you're going to lose material. So I move my rook here. And now he plays kind of a strange move, b4. But he's just gaining space. He said, you know what? I don't have anything super aggressive to do, so I'm just going to gain space on the side of the board with my pawns. If you have nothing else to do, sometimes that's the best idea. So I played a6, just keeping the pawn from going any further. And I was kind of running low of good moves here. I was already thinking about b6, queen to a7, I think. Yeah, I wanted to get my queen off d6 because what I eventually did was maneuvered my knight to that square, which is a little better square. Looking at some key central squares, and this bishop has an open diagonal now. I should probably mention this move b6, which actually turns out to be better than what I played. And it looks nice kicking that knight away, but I was just really worried about knight a6. And then I lose control of the c7 square. I just thought it had to be losing probably somehow. I can take the rook, and he takes with the queen. He's got full control over this file. And this is apparently a good move. According to the computer, it says I should play e5 here. Now, if the queen tries to infiltrate, we have ideas of taking this pawn, and then if he recaptures with the pawn, we win the bishop. So that's kind of a threat there. And there's this long, crazy line that the computer came up with, starting with queen c8 check. The rook goes in the way. The queen goes to c7. Now here, he's attacking the queen, and we don't have time for any of this like queen takes, knight takes, and then try to take the pawn and win the bishop because the knight's going to take my rook. So actually a better line is like queen to f8, getting out of the way. And this just looks bad. Look at white infiltrating, but apparently this is about dead even according to Stockfish. It's the computer program I'm using to analyze with. And bishop b5 attacks the rook. We attack the queen. Yeah, this is just crazy. Queen to b8, protected by the knight. Queen takes, knight takes. We take this pawn. And yeah, he just can't really do anything to me. Surprisingly enough, it's probably my best move. But I went a6. So he goes a4, just grabbing more space. And we'll see at the end of the game how just advancing these pawns, that was kind of my downfall, letting those pawns get that far advanced. You wouldn't think, I mean, they don't look that dangerous. But the closer pawns get to promotion squares, the more dangerous it can be. So I went queen to b6. Okay, so we're planning this and this. Queen d8 might look like a better square for the queen, which would allow the same maneuver, but this runs into knight takes b7 and attacking the queen. The rooks are adequately protected. I can take the knight, but then you got this. Pinning the queen to the king, you lost your queen. So that's why queen d8 is bad. So I went queen b6. And here he goes a5, which was kind of surprising. I thought b5 was a more likely move. And then I would just take, and then maybe bishop takes b5. That looks good. He's getting his bishop into the action. It's not a bad move, but a5 might be even stronger. Got to move the queen now. Going to d6 might actually be a little better, but this kind of abandons the plan of putting the knight there for now. And it would have just sort of been an admission that this move to b6 was a complete waste of time since I went right back where I came from. And I was not really mentally prepared to admit that I had totally wasted my time. Oh, also I should mention that taking the pawn on b4 is going to lose very quickly because he's got knight takes a6. Attacking the queen, again attacking the rook with 2 rooks. So queen to a7. h4 looked kind of mysterious to me. I didn't really understand it. Now that I've been playing chess longer, I do understand that advancing a pawn towards the king is often a good way to get something going, even when it's on the same side of the board as your king. So I just sort of ignored that, and I just moved my knight to e8, planning to go to d6. h5 was probably better. Just stop that h5 move by white. But I went here, and then he goes h5. Instead of knight d6, g5 might have actually been my best move here. This just bypasses this pawn, which is not really going to do anything to me now. It can't ever capture one of my pawns in front of my king. And the point is, after what I played, knight d6 and bishop d3, now I can't really get away with that move, because if I try it here, he's got h6. Now if I capture the pawn, he's got queen h5. If the bishop moves, he gets this pawn here with check. That's very bad. If I defend the bishop, knight takes e6, and that came with check. And this is a discovered attack on my rook. Again, that pesky knight. So taking the pawn doesn't work, and if you move the bishop, you go like to here, he's going to bring the queen in anyway. He's going to target this pawn, which might be hard to defend because you can go here, target this pawn. All right. So you can get into trouble with that move. Apparently I could get away with it before he had bishop d3, but once he plays bishop d3, it wasn't working. And I played rook c6. I'm getting ready to double the rooks, trying to defend against a possible piece sack on a6. I was already looking at this, where white might be able to get 2 pawns for the piece. You know, he could capture with the knight, and then I recapture. And then if he captures with the bishop, like if my queen was moved over here, which was kind of my plan, get my queen back into this more central location. This just adds some defense to that pawn. So that's another point of rook to c6. Queen g4. So apparently the queen side I've defended pretty well. So white just switches to the king side. All the pieces are converging on this square, but I just didn't really see any big problem. I went queen to a8, so my plan is to bring my queen back over towards this side of the board, since that seems to be where white's focus is. Not sure why I didn't play queen b8 instead. It adds more protection to the knight. I don't know if it makes a big difference going to b8 or a8. But here, I guess maybe because queen g3. Yeah, this is what the computer's saying. And this knight's pinned. And then I don't know what we do. If we try to move the queen somewhere, he's got this discovery. Yeah. So I just didn't want that pin to happen, maybe. I don't really remember what I was thinking there. Queen a8. So he goes queen to h4. All right. Attacking my rook. No biggie. I just defend with the queen. g3 is played here. So now he's thinking he wants to put his king here and then start putting the rooks on this file where he can open up the file by capturing this pawn whenever he wants to. So I saw that coming. I doubled the rooks. He goes king to g2. So here I went king to f8 because I want to challenge that queen. My plan was to put the queen here, and then he takes my queen, and then I can recapture with my king. That's why I put my king to f8. This was a mistake. I should have just played queen to e7 right away, and I can recapture with a rook. So queen takes, rook takes. I was very scared of this. Knight takes, and then I can take on c2. If I take like this, I lose my rook. If I take like this, he's just going to take. This is pretty bad. I got the 2 pieces for the rook, but he's got a pawn majority over here, and his rooks are very dominant. My pieces aren't really doing anything active at all. So yeah, white is totally winning here. So yeah, if I were to take the rook, and then he takes, and then capture, and then the bishop takes, I was afraid of this because you got the 2 passed pawns protecting each other, which are going to start marching forward at the cost of a piece. You know, he's got 2 pawns for the piece, but Stockfish says this is okay. It says I can just go here, attack the bishop. Maybe he moves the bishop somewhere. I just go knight c4. Giving up a pawn like this is apparently okay because I got my bishop and my rook, and they should be enough to keep these pawns at bay. So the computer says this is, white has a little bit of an advantage, but not anything significant. So it turns out that this sack on a6 wasn't even his best move. f4 would have been the better move here. Not really sure why. I can double my rooks, and then he just starts marching his king up, and it's just going to be a slow grind. This knight is just so strong here, and my bishop doesn't really have a lot to do. His pieces are just more active, and the computer says that white has a winning position, but who knows how long it would take to win right here. But I made life easy for him playing this king f8. And here's the brilliant move that the computer found. Queen to f4. At first I didn't think it was a problem. The obvious issue here is that this pawn is pinned. So if I don't do something about that, let's say, oh, I don't know, just make some random move. He goes here, here, here. Wins a pawn because I can't recapture. But there's also another threat which I didn't see. I just said, okay, I'll move my king back to g8. I've taken care of the threat. This pawn's no longer pinned. He can't win a pawn in this square. But here we go. Knight takes b7. And here, sacrificing a piece to get rid of my pawns over here does work very well for white. I took with the knight. Obviously, if I take with the rook, I lose a rook. That's no good. If I take the rook, he's going to throw this knight, takes d6, move in, attacking my queen. And the knight's protected. He's going to end up in material. I mean, I could grab another rook. He gets a queen. Yeah, this is no good. So I took with the knight, and then here we go. Queen takes c7. Now he's going to get both of my rooks for the price of a queen. So he's getting 2 rooks for the queen, and he sacked a piece for a pawn. So I'm significantly up in material here, but his pieces are just so dominant, and these pawns are going to be such a problem. He takes the pawn on c7, and this knight is under attack. So I have to do something. I go knight d6. And then I thought maybe he'd take this pawn, but that's not even what he did. He just went here, attacking my knight again. Now he's got 2 pieces attacking this pawn. So I decided to put my queen over here. Now he can't take my knight, or he's going to lose his rook. And if he takes the pawn with the rook, he's going to lose his rook. So he could take it with the bishop, but then I thought, hey, you know, I'll take this pawn here. Maybe I'll be okay. He's not worried about taking the pawn yet. b5. Okay, so what do I do? He's going to take this pawn, you know, and I'll have nothing to show for it. So what else can I do? I took the pawn. And then he threw in this move, which is really weird. H takes g6. I just recaptured. And then he goes a6. The whole point was to get this pawn moving. And I'm just finished, because this pawn's just going to keep moving forward. I played bishop f8 because I knew that if my queen was to try to stop this pawn, then some other piece is going to have to defend this knight against the rook, because this queen's going to have to... He's going to play this move in a minute, right? And then I'm going to have to go here, taking away the attack on the rook. Got to block the pawn, so let's say I didn't do that. I mean, let's just say I try something like this. He goes a7, and then, I don't know, put the king here. He'll just go here. And if the knight takes, then he gets the queen. So, you know, I saw that I was going to have to keep that queen in front of the pawn. So I put the bishop there. a7, queen a8. But now we got rook to b6. And here we go. He's going to come in here. And there's nothing I can do, because he's going to have control of the square. He's going to get a queen. Rook's protected by the pawn right there. So that was it. That was the end of the game. Very brilliant sequence of moves at the end. Very accurate play by the computer. Houdini. But hey, 3 million moves per second. It's going to find the winning lines for sure. So hope you enjoyed that.